Welcome to the Accounting Technology Lab, brought to you by CPA Practice Advisor, with your hosts, Randy Johnston and Brian Tankersley.
Good day. Welcome to the Accounting Technology Lab. I'm Randy Johnston with my co-host Brian Tankersley. We're pleased to have a guest today. Rishi from Witson Company is with us, and we're going to talk about lots of different AI applications that the firm has used and some products that are in play and so forth. So I think you'll find today's conversation to be pretty insightful. So Rishi, if I could ask you to introduce yourself and give us a little background, that would be appreciated.
Sure, absolutely, and thanks for having me. A little bit about WIS before getting into my background. Again, WIS is tech-enabled accounting and advisory firm. We strongly believe the future of profession is being rewritten by technology, and we're not waiting for the disruption. We're helping build it. So that's about WIS and me. I'm the partner and CIO. Like, again, my focus is technology, which means increasingly AI. My role blends between strategy and execution, and I do actually spend tremendous amount of time evaluating AI vendors, running the pilots, making sure what fits for the firm, like how can we leverage technology all the time to be more proactive.
Yeah. And, I know that many of the CIOs I know around the country have been pursuing these technologies. And I think that my understanding of the way you look at this, you are quite cognizant of accounting regulatory and client data constraints. And I'm going to set the question up just a little bit further because Brian and I may be the most client data protective of any public presenters or podcasters out there because we recognize it's actually part of CPA licensure. And we also recognize that a number of the vendors and suppliers are not protecting the data appropriately. And we've talked about that in other labs. So, what would you want us to know about industry context? Because again, when I think about it from a CPA firm perspective, or I think about it from an industry accounting perspective, we tend to live in that world and have for decades.
Yeah, definitely. I think data privacy, data confidentiality is pretty much top of our mind too. Like when we are serving the clients, we want to be very cognizant about like what actually being used by this vendors, there's a processors, like really careful about that. Again, like it's while evaluating a vendor, right? It's always important to know like what they're doing with data, like what kind of like retention rules do they have, like how are they using it, anonymizing stuff, like benchmarking, like really need to know, and the ability to export out the data, or like their ability to like, especially in the AI world, right, learning, so what exactly they are learning, how can we push when we no longer want to continue the relationship, right? So these are all really important, and industry specific rules, like again, in the AI world, like we see now hundreds of companies trying to pitch and saying that they're going to solve certain problems, right? So, like, how do we even believe that? Like, when coming to LLMs and this foundational models, they're good with general knowledge and stuff like that. But there's a lot of accounting is full of nuances. There's compliance, controls, industry specific rules, like, and not the least, the client level customizations, right? There's so much nuances that you need to evaluate and make sure like how these companies gonna handle these, or like the startup companies that they're saying that they can solve the problem and it's flashy demos, but when it comes to real world, it's really a messy world, and really need to make sure data privacy and data security is top of the mind, and the quality and accuracy of the results that they are producing is consistent with the again AI CPA guidelines or the controls that's needed, right? So that's why the context is really important. Like I'll just give a simple example, right? Like if you just look at like plain uh, foundational models, like anything, I don't want to name specific, but like just ask like what would my depreciation, accelerated depreciation gonna look like? It's a 50-50 chance that it's going to consider all the new tax code. Like without considering the tax code, then let's say if it misses, I say, hey, can you consider OBBB law and give me my accelerator description? Then it revises. That is not thinking like an accountant. That's basic for an accountant, right? So like that industry context, like very specific to the tax code, or like if it's an audit guidelines, whatever it is, right? So there's a layer of training that you need. And I call it, like, again, like the industry also calls it, more of a vertical AI, right? So there's few players who can actually kind of helping this, like beyond the big foundational models. Like again, co-counsel is one. We're working very closely with Basis from many years. They've been positioning themselves as like accounting AI. So that's really important, right? Like when the AI quality is so much not comparable for an obvious accountant, the adoption rate not going to be good. So, like again, like to sum it up, I think industry context is really critical for adoption, right?
Yeah. And, when we've talked about the frontier models, and I actually very specifically rank their security, I have OpenAI and ChatGPT far down the food chain for those reasons, and Copilot further up the food chain because of the similar reasons. And the other context here, though, is the accountant centric. So if you think about tax research, in effect, the Blue Jays and the tax GPTs and the accordances of the world, where they actually are thinking much more like an accountant, or maybe even more true to tax law, where the BNA AI is living, or Thomson Reuters co-counsel, Checkpoint co-counsel and CCH is living. So I am tracking with you on that as well. Now, when it comes to data governance, I know that we're going to see more data governance content from our own K2 group, because we've taught data governance in the past and really wanted to step up the data governance in AI again. And part of the reason for that is what vendors do with data in their own models is one thing. What they do when they pass that data to sub-processors
Yes,
is
yes.
another thing. And, with the OpenAI Intuit relationship announced in the last week or so, it is pretty clear to me that we have to be cognizant about that. So just help us understand how you are currently evaluating vendors when it comes to those things.
Yeah, I think, like, again, this some of the basics still stay the same in terms of like making sure SOC 2, making sure they have all the penetration testing, like in terms of how robust their systems are, right? But again, like now coming to more specific to AI, right? Like how are you supporting the multi-client model? Like how your data is stored? Like how do you separate them? Like what are the walls between that, right? That generate data now, even the AI learnings, every time you do something on your client data and you're correcting the path to saying that this is how you kind of do your client preferences, it's learning something. It's just like an accountant would have learned in your office, right? Like how do you get trained? So that learnings are going to another database. Maybe it's a vector database, whatever they're trying to use the RAG model for, right? So those are the learnings. Like again, like how are you segregating that? Like what are the rules of the road for that, right? So really understanding the model, again, like it's so premature at this point in time. Like unfortunately, we don't have any kind of a federal guidelines and stuff like that. It's like innovation versus like compliance, right? So but still we need to make sure like we understand what they are doing, and make sure the vendors are transparent and letting us know like how they are using all the data that you have, right? And like define the rules, like how are you purging it, like what, how long are you going to retain it? Because not necessarily the vendors that you might try now might exist in 6 months, 1 year, or you might be happy or not happy. You need to always make sure your client data is protected and your IP is protected. So
Yeah, understood. And today, have you built any agentic AI across Swiss?
yeah, we've been partnering very closely with Basis on the agentic AI side. Like, I mean, we do realize that like past couple of years has been conversational AI. Now it's agentic AI. We do little experimentation in-house with different Microsoft world where we live in, but majorly bank on the partners to build all these agentic workflows. We have multiple vendors that we are working on. Some of them are more like generic purpose accounting use cases that gonna solve, which is more, I would say, basis. But there are certain vendors that we work is very specific and niche to like a particular piece of the puzzle, right? So that's how we kind of solving it. But I have to say, yes, it's gonna work, but there are a lot of edge cases. The vendor that acknowledges and understands that yes, there are nuances. What works, what doesn't work is where like really you can bank on saying that, yeah, I mean, these people are not just the technology professionals, they understand the industry, they understand the nuances. So like we kind of weigh in and try to see like who is the long-term partner that we need to go with. But yes, I would say like 2026, especially coming up, going to be a cycle of maturing the agentic workflows. I see like two-step tasks, three-step tasks being executed, but when it comes to orchestrating a bigger end-to-end task, it's still not there. That's why we are partnering and co-building with all these, some of
Yeah.
these.
And for our listeners' purposes, one of the things that I thought was interesting is your firm has been running with the basis product for about 3 years. And of course, multiple other basis partners are ones that I've referred. So when I think about the way that things work, and you've probably had a good working relationship with Matthew and Mitch just because of your position there, or the Rillet product that Brian and I covered in a separate accounting technology lab podcast here recently, or perhaps like probably a newer vendor to you from the sounds of it, the tabs with Molly Shields and that team. You're used to dealing with vendors who see you, I think, as an attractive target. And so, how do you vet what they say they do in their privacy statements and in their user license agreements, in their EULAs, as well as what happens in the sub-processors? Or I assume you're digging that deep with most of these vendors to affirm that the client data for WISP is protected tightly.
Yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned those names again. Like just taking a step back, right? Like the way these are again complementary vendors, not necessarily acting on the same side. So we have developed an internal process that we call this lab. Literally, it's a funnel that kind of takes in all these vendors. Like I would say last year, at least 100 to 200 vendors we kind of evaluated. And like we kind of bucket them in the sense of like, is this product like Roulette, for example, is more they play in the ERP and native ERP space versus Basis is more accounting, automating accounting workflows and generic purpose, right? And there are some very specific niche, I would say like K1 kind of automation technologies, right? Like you need much more deeper expertise to build it, and we can't count on this. So there are different layers of how we see these vendors playing, right? And how we develop the relationships and how do we see them growing strategically, right? So that's how kind of like we even tier the partners. Like we have a different tiers on like what's our involvement with these vendors. Because sometimes it's heavily co-building where we have weekly calls, trying to do internal calls, feedback calls. Then we work with the vendors on like a filtered version of that. There are like monthly calls. We participate in like development cohorts which are run by them. So there's different levels of partnerships, and we tier that. So like we have a mature framework that kind of naturally evolved. Like we didn't plan for that, but the way the things were going on, like we put them in the lab. We'll say put them in the lab, and we have a kind of a strong internal group too, because we cannot rely everything on the vendors, right? So we have the tiers internally, like especially the business transformation team, who help us bridge and evaluate this at multiple levels, like at the domain level, trying to see the fit there, the technology level, and then the compliance, like the part that you have been asking. So, like again, like it's the probing is what we do and try to see like everything that we have has been checked off or not, right? Again, like we believe in that like whatever transparency that they have, like again, there's a layer of how much we could go, like, but we do ask them to list all the sub-processor, like what kind of models they are using. In some cases, they use proprietary models, want them to list it out. At least we are aware of it, right? So then we can make a call, like how, what's our risk appetite on trying to go, like, does this fall in the acceptable limit or not, because there's no proper guidelines over there, but we try to make sure we are as conservative as, especially when it comes to data and compliance.
Yeah, makes good sense to me. So I'm going to restate what I think I heard. You make sure that I've said it right. But, over the recent past for your firm, you've evaluated hundreds of products, AI products through your funnels. And, I always say I learn something new every time I speak with somebody, but you are tiering them, primary, secondary, tertiary, possibly, tiering the solutions and then, vetting them that way. And that's actually a pretty good framework for people to consider. Now, Brian and I and other accounting technology labs have talked about AI governance frameworks, and we've seen several vendors publishing these frameworks this year. Field Guide, I think, has one of the best published frameworks that I've seen for a while. But, I want to ask some questions about products, but I think, Brian, you've maybe got a comment or question.
I want to get back to brass tacks in practice, okay? Because you led with WIS being an advisory firm, okay? And so one of the things that, one of the problems historically with advisory is you only have so many partners in the firm, and all the juniors, or as I refer to them, the kids, want to, that are early in their career, they want to jump immediately into advisory. And the challenge is you have to have an industry competency and experience and understanding of the context in an industry to be well. We've learned that over the years we've done the podcast, that context is one of the things that AI does bring to technology. So the question I have for you is, give me 3 or 4 concrete examples of how AI has helped you and WIS make these things more leverageable, so there are more tasks that can be downloaded, that can be delegated to juniors, and so that the process is, and the practice and the advisory is more scalable.
So you're talking very specific to advice. So I'll give you some examples. Yeah, I think I have you on top of my mind, definitely. So account coding, right? Like, yes, QBO has it, like few other ERPs do have it, like really, like especially in the CAS world and like outsource accounting world, like you don't need a junior accountant sitting trying to code those transactions, right? So you feed in a 2 years ledger, you try to give, again, like there is issue over here sometimes. I'll be more practical in this because I've seen those cases. Like you feel that 2-year learning of your journal will make AI understand it, but there are cases where you might have done differently for the same vendor and classifying it differently. There could be reasons, right? So that's where the human in the loop comes, and we believe a lot on that. But like all that is like more than 95% is kind of automated now. Like nobody spends time more than reviewing it and making sure they approve the transaction. So that's a classic example. And AI looking at kind of reconciling to, let's say, payroll data and journal entries, and payroll actually the AI actually proposing the journal entries for payroll to make sure, right? So all these things like that you expect traditionally staff accountants or the seniors go through that. Like now they don't have to do it; they just review it. They're more from a preparer point of view to a reviewer, which gives them a lot of time for on the advisory side and the higher level tasks.
So, but how do you have an AI doing anything to capture specific knowledge at an industry level of operational type issues that you're using to advise clients?
On the advising on the clients is like, again, like we pretty much have gone deeper into the basis AI, and it's been like 2 years plus in the maturity cycle. I would say like all of our kind of cast practice, it goes through that. Like it has a full view. Again, they train on the accounting AI, which is where I was like going from foundational model and frontier models to like more specific to accounting. So we rely on them to train on the accounting specific and industry specific. What we give is the client knowledge, right? That could be from the contextual knowledge of your prior transactions in history, or that could be a corrections from our staff knowing the patterns of very specific what your client customizations are. So it's a mix of team effort.
Yeah. So Rishi, on that point, just enumerate for us. I'm going to ask you to do this with basis. I'm going to ask you to do it with Relit, but you just name 5, 6, 7 things that you say basis is doing this well for WIS?
Basis is doing well for kids. Again, like all these players kind of like competing people have an overlap. Like now it's kind of more converging to a lot more of overlap. But I would say that like the consistency in the quality is high. And again, I would say like there are certain areas of research, which is let's say co-counsel, like they have a lot of proprietary material. So the guidance that we give internally to, we use a lot of AI. Like we're not zeroing on one or two. Like nothing can match co-counsel when it comes to research because it's Thompson proprietary, right? Like it's very clear where to use AI, where not to use, what type of AI, right? So what we do internally is like clear guidance, right? And going back to your basis question, right? So it's good in like these kind of quick learnings and codings, and they're probably the best partner that I've seen in terms of taking the feedback, accommodating, and coming back in the fix cycle. Like some of them are like, we give the feedback today, they fix it tomorrow. Like it's super fast where our users do feel that, okay, they're listening and they're fixing and I can trust them. So that's the key important part of like adoption that we try to see. And going back to more on the AI side, I do feel they also better at like dealing with Excels, like when these different players interacting with Excel and the quality of output that you get in Excel is not so good. Like they had fixed data extraction, especially like the bank statements and all, like a year ago or even more with high consistency, right? So that's another thing. Like data extraction has been like almost taken care. They've been forefront in that.
And by the way, I want to stay on the path that we're on because what you just claimed about rapid modification cycle, that's absolutely been true with basis. And clearly the extraction and classification, that's another key area. I usually do call out things like rapid reconciliation, the interfaces with QBO and Sage Intacct,
Yeah.
the reporting capabilities in the platform. There's just so many things that it does from a productivity perspective. And I think it's because of the AI. So are there other things that your team have been reporting with basis?
In terms of the product development, or is it more like you mean like the AI efficiency side?
The AI efficiencies, I think, is the nature there of the question.
Yeah, like one other good thing again with Basis or any partner that I would say is like you need to partner with them to even come up with the most impactful use cases, right?
Mhm.
Like often we think something gonna work, but the quality of end output playing through an agentic workflow may not be the same. So like the and sometimes it's reversed. They could explain us like where actually their AI works, where it doesn't, and that's an open feedback that I always appreciate from them, and probably is a quality that you need to look for in any partner or vendor partner that you're looking for, knowing what you're not good at, because you're not chasing the wrong thing.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I'm going to do the same type of issue with Rillet because you've got your, I'll call it professional AI ledgers out there, the digits and the puzzles and so forth. But obviously, you picked one of the ERP ledgers, Rillet, Campfire being two examples in that area. So, what has Rillet done from a productivity AI for your firm, and what are some of the key features that you're leveraging there?
Yeah, well, like we do talk about AI, but like most of it is also in how you're integrating with a lot of other systems in the like kind of ecosystem, making sure you have the data available and like not chasing for the data, but you already have talking to these multiple. So they're probably one of the top people who are integrating with as many people as they can so that you don't have to like book those payroll journal entries or something else reconcile. Like you don't have to do that, like because they can talk and they can match and surface you like what are the breaks, right? So I think that's where I believe the foundation is, and layer in AI on top of it to give those kind of like analysis and judgment for like someone, for a human to review, is where they're excelling at.
That makes great sense to me. And really, this was probably getting to the third directional point that I wanted to make sure we discuss because in effect, with your use of basis, your use of tabs and so forth, in effect, you're really working with what you might consider to be true end-to-end partners there. And so you've talked a little bit about how you've discovered an adoption, but talk to us a bit about change management and team reskilling.
I mean, that's a like biggest problem, I would say. Like it's consistently across any technology or platform that you bring in, right? So, but again, we do put a lot of emphasis on training. Like forget about like tool specific training, like generic, like upskilling people in terms of like what does AI mean, like what is conversational AI, why do we have different models, like starting from the basics. Like I think that's really important for them to understand, and what we try to incorporate, and which we did like early last year, and we are doing a retraining of that, is like if you give generic examples, they would never understand it. Like we try to curate it like tax specific, like give it the tax examples. Like we even looked at like multiple outside third parties if they can do it, but none existed like a couple of years ago. So we built our own content, and which is more geared towards like what they can relate to and see how that playing out. So it's really important for them to understand, and like what is a prompt, like what is a context, like why is it important to it, like with the trainings and all, like always feel that like I have a third rule, like one third of the people are like motivated, you don't have to give them much information, they're on board and they're off the ground. The other third I see is like you need training to them, like this kind of training, like explain everything, then they understand. This other third is like it goes in multiple iteration, and you need to keep educating them again and again, and it takes time for that. It's just the nature of different segments of the people that we see at the firm, right? So we make sure we train as much as possible and a clear guidance, because I often see that it's overwhelmingly technology now, right? Like, why do we have so many tools? Like, what does it do? Like, a lot of people are with confusion. So we give a clear guidance on when to use what and what are the strengths. So, like, training is like a big emphasis on at West, like especially upskilling people, because like without that, like there's going to be not much of adoption, right? So that's on the people side, upskilling. Coming to the partners, right? Like again, like you already said that, right? That like the true partner is like someone who's there with you end to end. Like you should feel that they're an extension of your team. Like especially with this new age AI technology, I don't see any mature player out there. Like someone who could help diagnose a problem, design a solution, because there's a lot of feedback. Good feedback comes from accountants on the ground, right? Like running the pilots, like that's very important. Like we don't want to go any big bang, right? Train your staff like in the product, like, and when you say train your staff in that product, it's process reengineering. Like that's where we put a lot of emphasis saying that, hey, this is the old way of doing, this is the new way of doing this too, with the examples, right? So, I mean, all that cycle, we partner with that firm, and we have a strong internal team. I mean, that's something I would recommend everyone to have it. Like, we cannot put everything on the vendor. You need that team of process architect who can re-engineer the process with the new technology, right? And kind of be the change management, change champions.
Yeah, great, makes great sense. Well, you've got a ton of experience in this area and managing these technologies. Is there, as a kind of a final parting thought, any particular piece of advice that you'd give to firms that are trying to look for AI partners and how to avoid common pitfalls? What would you suggest as your key learning?
I mean, like on the under the surface, right? Make sure the transparency is there. They have the audit trails, like how they're coming to the conclusions and explanation, references, like even if AI is recommending something, like where did they draw the conclusions from, right? Like those are like more like detailed under the hood kind of thing. Like again, I don't want to go deeper into that, but like on the surface, right? Like don't just buy the tools, like buy the partners. Like look at the depth of their knowledge, not just technical, the domain expertise. Just don't buy the hype and the demos. And make sure you go through the pilots.
Yep.
A lot of people offer free pilots. Sometimes they are paid pilots, but yeah, whatever it makes sense for you based on the situation, based on the conviction, definitely go with the pilot.
Okay, makes great sense. So, Brian, final questions or thoughts?
It's just very nice to hear somebody else talking about worrying about privacy and other things in accounting firms. And I'm very glad to hear that WIS is, again, trying to take a leadership position in this area. And so it's very nice to hear this. No other questions, just very impressed and looking forward to seeing what you and the rest of the team come up with at WIS that we can learn more from, with the smaller firms that we talk to a lot.
Yeah. Well, super. Well, Rishi, thank you very much for your time today and your expertise. It's greatly appreciated. And we hope to have you back in the future. And for our listeners and regular followers, we'll talk to you again very soon on another Accounting Technology Lab. Good day.
Thanks, Jenny. Thanks, Brian, for having me. Thank you.
Welcome to the Accounting Technology Lab, sponsored by CPA Practice Advisor, with your hosts, Randy Johnston and Brian Tankersley.